Hello, and welcome to On Point. I'm Vivian Rayos. Over the past few years, vaping has become a phenomenon. Once marketed as a healthy alternative to cigarettes, now it is at the center of a public health crisis. In the past 6 months alone, the CDC has linked vaping to almost 2,000 cases of a mysterious lung disease. So far, at least 37 people have died. E-cigarettes, especially the hundreds of flavored brands, have become hugely popular among young people. The new National Youth Tobacco Survey found that 28% of high school students said they've used an electronic cigarette within the past month, with Juul being the most preferred brand. E-cigarettes heat oil containing nicotine, which makes the e-cigarettes addictive. They have been sold in the U.S. for more than a decade. In recent years, the vape market has expanded to include products containing THC, CBD, and other compounds. Cannabis vapes are becoming more and more popular, as indicated by growing black market and online sales. These unregulated products are marketed as containing as much as 99% THC. The CDC recommends people consider refraining from any e-cigarette or vaping products. On Point's Joe Willeford has the story.
Thank you, Vivian. My guests today are Marsha Ramos, volunteer board member with the American Lung Association and former mayor of the city of Burbank, Jessica Galura, CSUN public health student and intern at San Fernando Valley Partnership, and Dr. Tony Kuo, director of chronic disease and injury prevention, LA County Department of Public Health. So we'll get started with our first question, and this is to all of you. Regarding the current vaping health crisis, how do public health experts make sense of a situation like this? Things seem to have changed so rapidly. What happened? We'll start with you, Ms. Ramos.
Well, certainly I thought 15, 20 years ago that we were headed in a direction to eliminate tobacco use from access by young people, but it certainly has turned. And just as technology has been innovative in many ways, this e-cigarette, it's an innovative product, and it's been used quite successfully and to the detriment of our young people.
Thank you. Jessica?
So going off of what she said, Juul, one of the most popular e-cigarette brands, started back in 2015, and by 2017, they were one of the most popular ones. So it only took, 2 years for the company to really take off. And what really took them off was the flavoring of it. So, like she was saying, the ban of cigarette flavors back in 2009 was what really dropped the tobacco rate. And for them to come back again under a new product is just something that public health officials have really looked out for.
Dr. Kuo?
Yeah, I think I agree with Marsha and Jessica in that, at least in the last 3 years, we know that probably the e-cigarettes, and including Juul products, probably went under the radar as far as regulation. And unfortunately, I think it became, because of the flavoring, became very appealing to young kids. And so I think some of that vaping respiratory illnesses is just an outbreak because a culmination of 3 years of more and more youth getting addicted to nicotine.
Thank you. The next question is for Dr. Kuo. What is the government's responsibility with a public health issue like this?
Well, that's a great question. I think we are beginning to figure it out. I think for the public health department, I think number one, we need to educate the public. Number two, I think we try to work with both school campuses, cities, trying to pass responsible policies that actually restrict some of this work to youth. And then probably equally as important over time, we probably need to help the community prepare for some of the nicotine addiction that we're going to have to treat.
Ms. Ramos, do you have anything to add?
I think he hit it right on the head, but things do change. And I know I've been advocating for regulation on e-cigarettes for at least 10 years, and very little progress has been made, except for in the last, it seems like, year.
Yeah.
This next question is for you, Ms. Ramos. What is the American Lung Association doing to help the public understand the health concerns related to vaping?
Well, we're doing outreach with our volunteers and collaboration with organizations such as the Department of Public Health, LA County Tobacco Coalition, various nonprofits across LA County. Those are the ones that I'm knowledgeable with. But this is happening across the state of California and across the nation. So it's about educating, collaborating, developing new programs to help those quit. So there's a new product that we've launched on our website, and you can find out about it, lung.org. But we are really trying to go into school districts and provide some education and also access to quit smoking, quit vaping, because it's quite addictive. So those are some of the things we're doing. So much more needs to be done. And one of my favorite things to do is to advocate local agencies to regulate. And that's what I'm passionate about and familiar with. And I've seen many successes, and that's quite pleasing.
The next question is for you, Jessica. Many of the victims in the vape-related illness outbreak have been young adults. Why are young people so drawn to vaping?
So this goes back to just the flavoring in general. E-cigarettes are probably the first exposure many of these teens and youth have to flavored products like candy, mint, all of this, and that alone is just, it appeals to them. It gets them to try it, and not only does it get them to try it, it keeps them hooked the whole time. In addition to that, just the amount of social media influencers and just the marketing that's out there targeted towards the youth and the teens is really what's getting them right now.
So this next question is for all of you. There is confusion about the role of THC versus nicotine products in the current health crisis. Could you elaborate on that? And I'll start with you, Dr. Kuo.
That's a great question. We actually get asked quite a bit about this. Some of the initial cases were in fact related to some of the THC and cannabinoid products that were supposedly bought, in the black market or off market. Although if you look at the recent CDC statistics where they look at the cases of hospitalization, almost 55% actually is kind of like dual use. A lot of the people who ended up hospitalized were actually using both the nicotine and the cannabis product, and at least 11% is completely just nicotine. The point, in fact, is that we don't really know for sure how cannabis and other chemicals, but we do know that it is all related to e-cigarette use.
And the good news is we know that more research is being done. I had the privilege of going to UCLA Research Center last fall, and there's various studies on the impacts because more needs to be known, whether it be THC or nicotine, or in fact it's those additives added to e-cigarettes. So I am proud that the American Lung Association has continued to sponsor research.
Jessica, have you seen a difference? Is one more impactful, nicotine or THC, in young adults that you work with?
So at my internship, a lot of the surveys that we've taken at local schools, a lot of the teenagers are stating that they started off with nicotine vapes, but eventually it led to THC concentrated vapes, and a lot of the incidences the school administrators are coming to us about are related to THC and other concentrates like that. So it started off with nicotine, and now we're just seeing such an increase on THC, and because of Prop 64, the availability a lot of these teenagers have to these products, it's just becoming more and more, and it's flooding the schools. So a lot of it started with nicotine, but now it's making its way over.
The next question is for all of you. A ban on all e-cigarettes and vaping devices was recently proposed in Los Angeles. Do you think this is a good idea? And I'll start with you, Ms. Ramos.
Absolutely, I think it's a good idea. But I am one of the biggest advocates out there. Los Angeles County really did take a huge vote and a huge step forward. The Board of Supervisors, I call it a courageous effort. And when an entity that large, representing millions and millions and millions of constituents, take that kind of step, it really sends a message that this is dangerous. It has health impacts. These health impacts have consequences, and ultimately, the taxpayers as a whole are responsible for paying for those impacts. So if we can decrease it, then I think we all benefit, not only those that suffer the health impacts, but all of us as taxpayers.
Jessica?
I agree. I believe that it has to be a policy-wide ban, because if you come after companies individually, they're just going to come up under different names and just keep marketing their products. So if you go after the industry as a whole, it'll show the lasting effects of what it can do to your health.
Yeah, and as Marsha mentioned, our county did pass this very comprehensive ban, and it's important because there's, if you look at the data, there's like 15,000 flavors out there, and majority are actually probably most appealing to youth. And I thought it was courageous too for the county to do such a comprehensive ban, because it at least helps on the policy side so that we can all get to work as far as the education and treatment side.
So follow-up question. Critics argue that a ban on e-cigarettes would lead users to black market alternatives. What do you think about this? Dr. Kuo?
Well, black market has been in existence, I think, for all sorts of commodities. So, and we don't really have the ability to gauge it. I will say that, you know, even with the county ban, they did not really actually ban regular tobacco flavors. It's just those that are appealing to youth. So.
Okay. Ms. Ramos?
Oh, was this for everyone?
For everyone, sure.
Well,
If you have input.
I think that an overall ban is very important. E-cigarettes is certainly something that is very appealing, and maybe my colleague here can pick it up.
So a lot of what we've seen on school campuses, the concentrates and the different materials that they are bringing in are from not unregulated like sources in general, and people are buying this stuff off of Instagram or just online. So a lot of what we see already in schools is from like the black market, we can assume.
One type of regulation, if I may interject, that just came to me is the regulation of online sales. Prohibiting those could make an impact.
So the next question for you, Dr. Kuo. The U.S. isn't the only country with a vaping population, but seems to be unique in the number of vaping-related illnesses and deaths that are occurring. Why do you think that is?
Wow, that's a great question. I don't actually have an official answer for it. I think more research and investigation is needed. It could be the nature of the market, the freer market here. But I do suspect, I do know there have been cases too, I think in England and some European countries. So we'll see.
Thank you. And Jessica, this question is for you. How do you work with young people on an issue like this?
So a lot of what these young people think is that it's okay to bring it into these schools, and it's okay to vape because everyone else does it. But a lot of what our data showed that more young people think their friends are doing it than that are actually doing it. So I think what needs to be done is changing the culture around it to show them that it's not okay to do this in schools, if anything, and not everyone around you is doing that. So not only just educating them on the harms of it, but just changing their perception around the use of it.
Dr. Kuo, can you share any details about the vaping-related death that occurred here in Los Angeles?
Well, it is related to a vaping device. I do know that fortunately we only have one death, although we've had about 29 cases up to now. As you know, there's 1,800 cases, over 1,800 cases nationally. We do know that of all our cases, 50% are actually in younger adults and youth.
Thank you. Ms. Ramos, how are e-cigarettes and other vaping products regulated?
Well, through typically we like the federal government to do some regulation, and in fact they do, the Food and Drug Administration. But states and counties and local government can all regulate, and in fact they have. So tobacco began at the federal level, and increasingly, cities are regulating even further. The city of Beverly Hills is banning tobacco sales in their city, with a few exceptions. But these are the things that local leaders, elected officials, can do to really make a big impact.
So our last question is for all of you. What can be done to stop the current health crisis? I'll start with you, Dr. Kuo.
As I mentioned before, I think comprehensive both policy, education, and then basically offering resources for those who are addicted to nicotine, I think is very important. In fact, LA County, we have 2 resources. We have a laquits.com website, as well as we often refer people to the 1-800-NO-BUTS quit line. So I do encourage people who are dealing with these issues to visit those resources.
Jessica?
I believe it's policy at the end of it, because education can only take a person so far, knowing like the benefit or the risks of using. But I believe once it gets to the policy, and that's when individuals will understand like it's not okay, and there's different things that go into it.
As we wait for policy to be enacted, I think it's important to do outreach, and we have to do pretty big outreach, especially across the nation. But let's take Los Angeles County, for instance. It has to be outreach that impacts our diverse communities. Different communities need to receive the information. They may not be receiving what you see on network news, but outreach is a good thing, and that's probably the reason I'm here today.
Well, we're all out of time, but thank you to all of you for joining us, and we'll be right back.
Twinkle, twinkle, little star.
Welcome back. We are joined now by Dr. Chidinma Chima-Melton, Assistant Professor of Pulmonary and Critical Care Medicine at UCLA. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So first question, what are the potential causes for the recent spike in vaping-related illnesses and deaths?
So I think it's a twofold reason. This has always been there, and we're becoming more and more aware of it. Previously, you'll go to your doctors, or high schoolers, college students would go to their physicians and will ask questions, but no one really asked about e-cigarette use. We'll say, do you smoke marijuana? No. Do you smoke cigarettes? No. And then we'll stop the question in there. It's only recently, with the increase in recognition about the cases, that physicians are actually asking about it. So our sensitivity for it has increased. And so we're finding more and more cases. In addition to that, as you know, the people are using these devices more and more. And so we're seeing the twofold increase for that reason.
Okay. And what are the short-term and long-term effects of vaping on the body?
So the short-term effects we're seeing very clearly now. What's really concerning about the vaping epidemic, and it is an epidemic, is the fact that you have people who are young and otherwise have no medical problems ended up incredibly sick from this. When I say sick, we see a vast difference in the things they present with. In some cases, it's just mild symptoms, almost similar to the flu. A little bit of cough, a little bit of shortness of breath, feeling like you can't do as much as you normally do. And then in the extreme cases, you have situations where the oxygen levels go down and they end up in the hospital, in some cases ending up on life support, and some of them unfortunately pass away from it. So there's a huge difference in how it presents. Sometimes it might not even be breathing related things. Sometimes it's as simple as having a low-grade fever. A lot of the time, about 50-60% of the time, people report that they actually have diarrhea, abdominal pain, and they think they have a stomach bug, but it's actually related to the vaping.
Now, there's confusion about the role of THC versus nicotine products in the current health crisis. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so with vaping, there's obviously different types of cartridges you can load it with. Some of them contain nicotine, some of them contain THC versus CBD products. And we're seeing more lung injury associated with the use of THC, CBD containing products. In fact, it's about 70% of the cases we've seen so far nationwide are associated with the use of THC or CBD. Could that be due to something in the manufacturing, the type of volatile compounds that are in there, the heavy metals that when they heat them up with the devices, what it emits? We don't know yet, but that's what we're seeing. People who report using THC versus and CBD products having more vaping-associated lung injury. And to sort of expand on that, a lot of people use vaping as a way of bridging themselves off cigarettes because they think that perhaps e-cigarette use is not as dangerous. Cigarettes have been around for a long time, and there's a lot of literature about it already. We've done a lot of research. We know cigarettes definitely bad for you. Don't do it. And then often the patients I see will tell me, "Oh, vaping, it allowed me to quit, and I'm not as it's natural products in there." That's often the term I hear, and it's far from it. Okay, so with cigarettes, it's thousands of compounds in there. With vaping, initially it starts off at 60. But what they don't realize is after you heat these products up, a lot of different volatile compounds are made, and often we don't know what they are, and those are the ones that are causing the problems. So right now, yes, cigarettes are definitely bad. They cause lung cancer, emphysema, all the bad stuff. We just don't have the data on vaping. And the concerning thing is the models that we've done in the lab, mice models, there's a huge increase in the risk of lung cancer, bladder cancer, as well as acute lung injury in these. So what concerns me about this is an epidemic that we're going to see coming down the line of young people who have, on average, 80, 70 years left to live, and then having cancer risk increasing so quickly in them.
You've touched on how dangerous vaping is. Is there a difference between products in terms of safety?
So again, I don't think we have enough data to say that. Right now it's about just shy of 2,000 cases nationwide as of end of last month. And so, the jury's still out on which one is safer versus not safer. My advice would be don't risk it, just don't use it. Because even in the nicotine-based products, there's 30% of them, 30% of the cases we identified are associated with just nicotine use. All right. And then it's not just the lung injury part you worry about, it's also the addiction. The amount of nicotine in these products is an order of magnitude higher than it is in a cigarette. So you have people who are essentially addicted to nicotine much earlier. You have 15, 16, 17-year-olds addicted to cigarettes more so than they would be had they been smoking. I'm not endorsing smoking by any means, but at the same time, these are really, compounds that we don't have much research on that we know cause harm.
Right. So in terms of health effects, what does smoking and vaping have in common, and are there differences?
Absolutely. So what vaping does is that it, and I assume a lot of your viewers are aware of it, but just to let's take a step back and describe it. You have a cartridge and it's heated up, there's a battery pack and it's heated up, the liquid, and basically you inhale it in, it passes through the mouth and then into the airways. Within the airways, my advice often is any smoke you can see is probably not things you should be breathing in. It causes an acute inflammatory reaction. And what that means is a lot of the cells that are there to defend your body flood into the lungs. You end up with fluid around the lungs, and not only that, the oils also end up in the lungs. One of the things we see is called lipoid pneumonia, which is basically an oily looking pneumonia that people have. The unfortunate thing about this is that often it goes underdiagnosed. Someone comes into the hospital and we take a history, or they come into the clinic and we don't know what's happening. So we treat them like a regular pneumonia. A week, a couple of weeks, they're not getting better. And that's often when we start trying to figure out what else is going on here. So, the pneumonia aspect is a big one. It can cause diseases like asthma, trigger asthma-like symptoms as well. And then, long term, as I mentioned, we don't know what it does with regards to cancer. That's really the thing that bothers me, because the animal model studies are really concerning right now.
Now, in your work, what specific health issues have you seen caused by vaping? I think you touched on some of them.
Right. So the thing about vaping is that it's a great imitator in the lungs. There's a lot of different things that it can present in lots of different ways. So as I mentioned, it can look like just a common cold. You can have no respiratory symptoms whatsoever and just feel poorly, just feel like you have a little bit of fever, body aches, abdominal pain, diarrhea. And then it goes to the other extreme where you come in and you're incredibly short of breath. You're having a hard time breathing. In some cases, you might be coughing up blood. Some cases not. But it's often what we look for in order to diagnose this as a vaping-related lung injury is that exposure, and the exposure within a 90-day period. So you may have done it 89 days ago, and then you're like, oh, it's definitely not vaping. But if you have that exposure and we don't have another reason to say that what you're experiencing isn't vaping associated, then it goes under that category of vaping associated lung injury.
Right. Now, people have been vaping for years, but just recently we're seeing a spike in vaping-related illnesses and deaths. Mm-hmm. Now, is that health effects catching up to people that have been vaping, or has something changed with the product?
That's a really insightful question, and I think it's a dual thing there. I think part of it is our ability to diagnose the disease is better because we're actually more attuned to it and we're actually asking the appropriate questions now. All right. The other part of it is more and more people are vaping also. So we're seeing this spike in people vaping, and that's coinciding with us diagnosing identifying and diagnosing the disease appropriately. And then finally, I think there are some people where it's just repeated exposure, ongoing exposure to the same smoke and the same irritants in the lung that is causing the cases to appear. I'm just thinking about example of patients I've seen where, someone came in and they had abnormalities in their CAT scan and they've been vaping for a few years. No, they felt they were fine with it, and no one could explain this. And after we talked for a while, I realized it's got to be the vaping. There was no other exposure that this person had that could explain it. And after they stopped vaping, repeated the CAT scan a month later, completely normal. So it doesn't matter really when you start, as long as that exposure is there.
Well, thank you. That's all the time we have. Thank you for joining us.
It's been a pleasure. I think it's really important that your viewers are aware of the risk associated with it, because even if you don't vape, everyone has loved ones who do it. And it's important that we try and stop this epidemic in its tracks now. Thank you.
Thank you for watching On Point. You can follow us on social media at CSUN On Point. You can hear us on KCSN 88.5 FM on Sunday mornings at 5:30. You can watch us on Santa Clarita Valley Television on Sundays at 5 and on LA 36 at 4 on Thursday afternoons and 7:30 on Friday nights. For all of us here at On Point, I'm Vivian Rayos.